Imagine losing someone you love so completely that over time you stop expecting to ever see them again. Not because you don't care, but because life has quietly trained you to accept the absence. And one random day, universe decides to play a joke so precise, so improbable that if it happened in a movie, people would call it unrealistic. So these are one of those stories. And by end of it, you'll be asking yourself the same questions many of people have asked after hearing it. What are the odds? In 2007, a 60-year-old man named Michael lived a quiet life in Bow, East England. Quiet in a way that doesn't mean lonely, just settled down with life. He was semi-retired, having spent most of his working years as a carpenter. These days, his world revolved around his wife, his two younger daughters, and the small routines that make life feel safe. But there was something missing, something that has been missing for a long time. 10 years earlier, Michael had gone through a painful divorce from his first wife. The separation was messy, emotional, and final. When it was over, Michael moved away, about an hour and a half south, leaving behind a house they once shared in Sudbury, England. His ex-wife stayed, and so did their daughter. Her name was Lisa. She was 21 years old when Michael last saw her. And after the divorce, contact didn't slowly fade. It stopped completely. No phone calls, no letters, no updates, just blank silence. At first, Michael told himself that it was temporary, that once emotions cooled, things would normalize. But days turned into months, months into years, and years into a complete decade. By 2007, Michael realized something that hit him like a wave. He didn't see it coming. He didn't know his daughter anymore. He didn't know where she lived. He didn't know if she was married, if she had any sort of children, and worst of all, he didn't know if she ever thought about him. That realization didn't come during an argument or a breakdown. It came quietly, one ordinary day. And as it came into Michael's mind, it refused to leave. Michael spoke to his wife, then his daughters, and finally he said the words out loud, "I need to find her." There was just one problem. Michael had nothing to go on. No phone number, no traces, no email, no social media. He didn't even know where his ex-wife lived anymore. The only thing he still had was an address, and it was not even the current one. The old address, the house in Sudbury where his daughter had grown up. So in August of 2007, Michael and his two young daughters got into their car and drove north towards Sudbury. They didn't talk much on the drive. There was hope, but also fear. What if Lisa didn't want to be found? What if this was reopening a door better left closed? Eventually, they reached the family street. Brick houses lining both sides. Michael recognized it instantly. He pulled up in front of his old home and parked. He told his daughters to stay in the car. Maybe there was some sort of danger inside. This was something he needed to do alone. Michael walked up the front door, stood there, took a deep breath, and then he knocked. The door opened, but it wasn't Lisa. It wasn't his ex-wife. It was a complete stranger. Another family entirely. They had moved in years earlier. They didn't even know Lisa. They didn't know where she went. They had no forwarding information. Nothing, completely blank. Michael thanked them politely, turned around, and walked back to the car. His daughters could tell immediately this wasn't the reunion they had imagined. At this point, most people would have just given up, but how could he? So, three of them did something else. They drove. No destination, just around Sudbury. Past familiar streets, past places that used to mean something. They used to play around that places. They talked about what to do next, and eventually someone said it. What if we put something in the newspaper? It wasn't a grand plan, just a fast, desperate one. But desperation has a way of pushing people forward. So they drove to the office of local paper, the Suffolk Free Press. Inside, Michael explained his story to the reporter. He talked about the divorce, the lost decade, the daughter he still loved. The reporter listened quietly. Then he said something very unexpected. This is a good story, not good in a sensational way, good in a human way. They agreed to run a small feature, a photo, a short write up, Michael's contact information. The hope was simple that somehow, somewhere, Lisa would see it. A photographer walked them outside, lined them up on the street. Michael stood in the middle, his two daughters beside him. The photographer snapped a few shots, and that was it. They thanked the staff, got back in the car, and drove home to East London. Michael tried not to hope too much, but hope was way of sneaking in anyway. Now, here's where the story takes a turn, because while Michael was beginning his search, Lisa was doing the same thing. In August of 2007, Lisa was 31 years old. She was married, she had three children, and had built a life, but something was missing for her too. She wanted her kids to know their grandfather. She wanted closure. She wanted her father back in her life, and just like Michael, she had no idea where to start, no phone number, no mail, no media. She spoke to her mother, spoke to friends. She even tried looking him up online. Nothing. Michael Dick didn't exist in digital world, so she felt struck. Until one day, a few days after Michael had visited Sudbury, Lisa was at work. She stepped into the break room, and sitting on the coffee table was a copy of Suffolk Free Press. She picked it up casually, started flipping through, then stopped because something looked familiar. There was a photograph, a street in Sudbury, and in the background of that photo, she saw herself walking with her mother, captured mid-stride, completely unaware. Lisa leaned closer, confused. Then she read the captions and nearly collapsed. The man in the photo standing front and center was her father. The two girls beside him, her stepsisters. Lisa had unknowingly walked directly behind them while the photo was taken. She had been less than 100 feet away on the exact day her father came searching for her. After 10 years apart, after countless missed chances, after all that distance, they had been in the same place at the same time, separated by seconds. Lisa read the article, read the contact details, and called the number. Michael answered, and at first he didn't believe her. He thought it was a prank, a scam, until she said one sentence that changed everything. "I'm in the picture." There was silence, then disbelief, then emotion. Michael drove to Sudbury immediately. That day he met his grandchildren for the first time. A decade vanished in the moment, and today they are still in touch. Now pause for a second, because this story is already unbelievable. But when you break it down, it becomes almost impossible. The odds of Lisa being in Sudbury that day, the odds of her being on the exact street, the odds of her walking behind them during the photo, the odds of her seeing that paper, that photo. It wasn't destiny, it was coincidence, the rarest of rare. And this is just the first story. In the next true story, we're going to cover a man who didn't just cheat, he was swallowed by it. And he lived. Now, this true story, or incidents, whatever you say it, happened in 2021. If you have ever spent time out on the open ocean, you know there is a strange comfort that comes with it. The water looks endless but familiar. The horizon stays still. And after a while, your brain starts believing that nothing unexpected is going to happen. That's exactly how Michael Peckett fell on the morning of June 11th, 2021. Nothing about that day felt unusual. Michael was 57 years old, a lifelong commercial diver, and someone who has spent more time underwater than most people spend driving to work. The ocean wasn't something he feared, it was something he understood. That morning, he and his longtime diving partner, Josiah, headed out from Cape Cod just after sunrise. Their plan was simple: lobster dive for a few hours, fill the boat, head home. The water was calm enough that it felt routine, and that's what made it dangerous. Michael suited up, checked his gear, and slipped into the water. Josiah stayed aboard the boat, keeping an eye on things, ready to help if needed. And for next couple of hours, everything went exactly as planned. Michael would disappear below the surface, then reappear a few minutes later with lobsters in hand. Not an amazing haul, but good enough to make a trip worthwhile. But around 8 a.m., they had around 100 pounds on board. Most people would have called it a day. Michael decided to do one more dive. Josiah watched as Michael floated on the surface for a moment. Adjusting his equipment, Michael put his regulator back in his mouth, gave the signal that he was good to go, and then slowly sank beneath the water. The surface closed above him. Josiah leaned back, relaxed, scanning the horizon, just chilling on the boat. And then the ocean erupted. Right where Michael had gone down, the water exploded upward. Violent, chaotic, like something massive has just broke down from below. Josiah rushed to the edge of the boat, looking down, expecting to see Michael surfacing fast. But there was nothing. No bubbles, no movement, just disturbed water and something huge shifting beneath the surface. Down below, Michael felt the impact before he understood it. It wasn't gradual, it wasn't subtle. It felt like being hit from behind by something solid and unstoppable. The force knocked his regulator out of his mouth, and in the same instant, the light disappeared. Total darkness. Michael reached out instinctively, trying to orient himself, trying to find his air hose. His hands hit something immediately. It was not rock, not metal. Something soft, but really firm. And it was moving. The space around him wasn't still. It shifted. It is like flexing and surged, as if walls themselves were alive. And suddenly, Michael understood that he wasn't just underwater anymore. He was somewhere else. He found the hose, jammed the regulator back into his mouth, and took a breath. And with that breath came the realization that he had been avoiding. This wasn't an accident. This was a mouth. At first, his brain went where every diver's brain goes, shock. But as he felt around, there was no teeth, no tearing, no pain, just pressure, especially around his legs where something enormous seemed to be closing on him. And that's when it clicked. He hadn't been attacked, he was swallowed completely. Michael was inside a humpback whale. Not because the whale wanted him there. Humpbacks usually don't eat people, but because in a single disastrous movement, Michael had been mistaken for part of whale's meal. For the next half minute or so, time stopped making sense. The whale thrashed its head side to side, trying to get rid of whatever didn't belong inside it. Michael slammed against the interior walls as the whale churned violently around him. The pressure on his legs increased. His thoughts narrowed. He remembered thinking very calmly that this was it. He would not be getting out of there. Not panic, just acceptance of what it is. Up above, Josiah was convinced that his friend was gone. He had no idea whatsoever where Michael was or what had happened after that incident. Only that something massive had surged up from below and Michael had vanished with it. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The whale expelled Michael. He was thrown back into open water. Light flooding in the ocean reclaimed him. He surfaced, gasping for air and still trying to understand what has just happened. Josiah saw him immediately, pulled him back onto the boat. Michael collapsed on the deck, shaking, and when he finally found his voice, all he could say was, "I was inside of that thing." Emergency services were called and Michael was rushed to the hospital. Doctors examined him, expecting the worst, but as the examinations went on, their confusion grew. There was a bruising on his legs where whale's mouth had clamped down. Other than that, there was nothing catastrophic, no injuries that explained how close he had come to dying. By the end of the day, Michael was sent home alive. Talking about the marine experts, later they explained that whale was likely a juvenile, large enough to scoop Michael up but not capable of swallowing him fully. The whale realized its mistake almost immediately. and that instinctive correction made all the difference. What surprised people the most wasn't what happened to Michael, it was how he talked about it afterward. It wasn't dramatic, he didn't swear off the ocean. In interviews, he treated it just like another strange thing that had happened out there. And when someone asked if he is planning to dive again, he said yes, without hesitation. In the next part, we move away from survival stories because the next story starts with a decision most of us would make without thinking even twice, helping a stranger. And it ends with a consequence so cruel and coincidental that even the investigators struggle to wrap their heads around it. So this story is titled, He Let the Wrong Person Walk Away. Late at night, when you're tired, your guard is down, your brain starts making deals with itself. It'll be probably fine. I don't want to be rude, but what's the worst that could happen? Those thoughts have ended more lives than bad intentions ever have. And this story is about a man who ignored every instinct he had. Not because he was careless, but because he was trying to be kind. On night of June 22nd, 1991, Charles Holden finished his shift at work and drove home through Harrington, Delaware. It was late. The streets were almost empty. Before heading home, Charles decided to stop at a fast food restaurant near his house. Nothing unusual, just grabbing something quick before calling it a night. He ordered his food, got back into his truck and turned the key. That's when he noticed someone running toward him. The man was waving his arms, clearly trying to flag him down. Charles hesitated. This wasn't a busy area, and it was well past midnight. His instincts kicked in immediately. "Don't roll down the window," he said. But the man looked frantic, not aggressive. As he reached the truck, he leaned in and explained that his sister was in labor and he needed a ride to hospital about 20 minutes away. Charles didn't like this. Everything felt so wrong about it. So he said no. The man's reaction was immediate. His shoulders dropped, his expression fell, and without another word, he turned around and started walking away. Charles watched him go, and then something familiar happened. Guilt. Charles told himself he was overreacting. Maybe the guy really did need help. Maybe turning him away was the wrong thing to do. So Charles called out, "I'll give you a ride part of the way." The man turned around instantly, almost waiting for that thing to happen. He smiled and climbed into the passenger seat. They drove for about 3 miles. Charles stayed quiet, alert, hands tight on the wheel. He decided this was far enough. He pulled over to the side of the road and told the man this was as far as he was going. That's when everything changed. The man's behavior flipped completely. He reached into his pocket. His voice hardened. He told Charles to hand over his keys and wallet, or he'll be killed. Charles didn't wait to see what came out of that pocket. He shut off the engine, ripped the keys from the ignition, and bolted from the truck. Charles ran. He could see a convenience store far ahead and figured it out. He could just make it there, and he'll be safe. Then he heard footsteps behind him, fast ones. He turned and saw a man sprinting towards him, holding a screwdriver above his head. Charles knew he wasn't going to outrun him, so he stopped, put his hands up, and said he'll do whatever the man wanted. The man smiled again, poked Charles in back with a screwdriver, and walked him back to the truck. The stranger told Charles to get inside and wait. Charles did exactly what he had said to him, and he was totally overpowered by the stranger. And at that moment, the man stepped back to get in. Charles started the ignition and floored it. He didn't stop, didn't look back. In the rearview mirror, he saw the man chasing him for a few seconds, screwdriver still raised, before finally stopping and turning away. Charles drove until his hands stopped shaking. He debated calling the police, but he didn't. He blamed himself for letting a stranger into his truck and convinced himself it was over. The only thing that bothered him was that this happened close to his home. So instead of driving straight back, Charles spent an hour driving aimlessly, hoping the man would be long gone by the time he returned. Eventually he headed home, and as he turned onto his street, he saw him. He saw him again. The man was walking down the road right near Charles's house. Charles immediately threw the truck into reverse and got out of there. This time he didn't hesitate at all. He called 911. Police arrived quickly and agreed to escort him back home. By the time they arrived, the man was gone, no sign of him. Charles went inside, shaken but safe. But before the officer left, Charles asked him to check on someone else. His mother. Charles' mother, Dorothy, lived just behind him, separated by a line of bushes. She was 70 years old and lived alone. Charles hadn't heard from her that night, but something didn't feel right. He was not getting the right intuition. The officer agreed to check. He walked through the backyard and immediately noticed the back door. The glass was broken, the door was ajar. The officer drew his weapon and entered the house. He called out, no answer. The house was dark, silent. Upstairs he found blood. It led into a bedroom. Dorothy was on the bed. She had been stabbed to death. Investigators would later piece together what has happened. After Charles escaped the stranger, a man named Gilbert Cannon was looking for somewhere to stay, and the house he chose was Charles's mother's. Dorothy had come down the stairs and encountered him, and because he feared she could identify him, he killed her with the same screwdriver he used to threaten Charles. Gilbert later admitted he had no idea Dorothy was Charles's mother. He didn't plan it. He didn't target her. It was a mere coincidence. Cruel, unforgiving coincidence. Gilbert was pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Charles Holden lived the rest of his life carrying a weight that was never his to bear. A decision made out of kindness, a moment of hesitation, and a chain of events that no one could undo. This story isn't about blaming Charles, it's about understanding how thin the line can be between ordinary life and irreversible tragedy. In the next part, we move into territory that feels almost impossible. A woman escapes a murderer only to die hours later in a way that no one could have predicted. And it forces one of the hardest questions this series asks. What if surviving wasn't the end? She thought it was over. When people talk about surviving something horrific, they usually imagine the moment it ends, the escape, the door slamming shut, the breath of relief. But in real life, the most dangerous moment often comes after that, when your body is still running on adrenaline, but your mind starts believing and telling that you are safe. This story is about a woman who did everything right and still didn't get to walk away. In early 2000s, a man named Lisa was living an ordinary life in the United States. She had a job she liked well enough, a small social circle, and a kind of routine that makes days blur together in a comforting way. Nothing about her life suggested she was headed towards danger, which is exactly why she didn't see it coming. One evening, Lisa stopped at a local store on her way home. It was late. But not suspiciously late. The parking lot was almost empty, but that wasn't unusual. She locked her car, grabbed what she needed, and headed back outside. That's when she noticed a man standing near her vehicle. He wasn't aggressive, he wasn't shouting, he wasn't kind of doing anything. He just smiled and asked if she had the time. Lisa answered, "That was mistake number one." The man stepped closer. Too close. And before Lisa could react, he grabbed her arm and shoved her toward her car. He moved fast, efficient, like someone who had done this before multiple times. He pressed something hard onto her side and told her not to scream. Lisa screamed anyway. What saved her wasn't strength. It wasn't luck, it was refusal. She fought, she kicked, she twisted her body in a way that broke his grip just enough to slip her free. And when she did, she ran towards the store and just away from the stranger. The man chased her, not far enough, but long enough for her to believe, truly believe that she was about to be dead. And suddenly he stopped, watching her, and he walked back into the darkness. Lisa didn't slow down until she reached a nearby road. A car passed, then another. She flagged one down, sobbing, barely able to speak. Police were called. An ambulance arrived. Lisa was visibly shaking. Scraped up, but alive. She gave a statement, described the man, his voice, his hands, and way he moved so quickly that she wasn't able to do anything. It was sheer luck that she somehow got out of his hands. Officer told her she was lucky. They said most people didn't go away. That night, Lisa didn't sleep. Every sound made her flinch, every shadow looked like him. But as the hours passed, something else set in, relief. The kind that sneaks upon you and convinces you the danger has passed. She was alive, she has escaped, the story was over. The next morning, Lisa went back out. Not because she was careless, because life doesn't pause when you are traumatized. She had responsibilities, places she need to be, and in her mind, the threat was behind her. The police were looking for him. She was safe now, but what Lisa didn't know was this. The man who attacked her hadn't disappeared. He hadn't fled the area. He hadn't panicked at all. He was still moving through the world as if nothing had happened. And the danger she escaped hadn't actually passed. Later that day, something went wrong. Not connected or intentional, and not violent in a way we usually imagine. Just sudden and final. By the time authorities arrived, Lisa was gone. When investigators later reviewed her case, the timing stunned them. She survived an encounter that should have ended her life. She made it out, she got help, and she did everything right. And yet she never got a chance to recover. The man who had attacked her was eventually identified. He was linked to other crimes, other women, patterns that made clear that Lisa had not been a random target. She had interrupted something far darker. There is something deeply unsettling about this case, not because Lisa escaped, but because for a brief window of time, survival felt like victory, and then reality took it away. When Lisa woke up the morning after the attack, her body felt like it didn't belong to her. Everything hurt, her muscles, her throat, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. But she was alive, and the fact alone felt miraculous. And later that day, Lisa was involved in an accident, sudden, violent, unrelated to attack in any obvious way. Emergency services arrived quickly, but it didn't matter. Lisa died before she could have been taken to the hospital. Just hours after surviving something that should have killed her, when investigators reviewed the timeline later, they struggled with it. The attack, the escape, the death, all compressed into less than 24 hours. The man who tried to abduct her did not kill her, for sure. Fate did. And that distinction made the case harder to process, not easier. In the next part, we move away from coincidence and fate, because the next story is about someone who didn't escape, someone who didn't survive, and someone whose biggest mistake was believing they could insert themselves into a crime without being noticed. The next part is titled, He Was Always There. When serious crime happens, there's a moment right after where everything feels chaotic. Police arrive, neighbors gather, details are unclear. And in that confusion, there is almost one person who seems unusually calm, too calm, helpful, present, eager to talk. This story is about a man who never left the scene of crime because he didn't need to. He was exactly where he wanted to be. In early 2010s, a woman named Rachel was reported missing from her small hometown in the United States. She was in her late 20s, quiet, reliable, the kind of person who didn't disappear without telling someone. When she didn't show up for work and she didn't answer her phone, people noticed quickly. By that evening, police were involved, and almost immediately, one man stepped forward to help. His name was Daniel. He lived nearby. He told officers he had seen Rachel the night before, said he was worried, said he wanted to help however he could. He wasn't defensive and wasn't evasive. In fact, he seemed almost relieved that police were asking questions. And because of that, nobody looked at him twice. Search teams were organized, flyers were printed, friends and family gathered at the local police station desperate for information, and Daniel was there for all of it. He attended vigils, spoke to reporters, comforted Rachel's parents. He told anyone who could listen how close they were, how much he cared, how he wanted her to come home. Police interviewed Daniel more than once. Each time he told the same story. He had seen Rachel last near her apartment. They talked briefly. She seemed fine, nothing unusual, and because his account never changed, investigators began to trust him. Consistency feels like honesty. Sometimes it isn't. As days passed on with no sign of Rachel, the investigation slowed. There were no leads, no witnesses, no physical evidence pointing in any direction. And Daniel stayed close. He checked in on the detectives, asked if there was anything else he could have done, offered suggestions, the kind of suggestion that seems helpful unless you know what to look for. At one point, Daniel suggested an area just outside town, a place most people didn't go often. He said Rachel liked to walk there sometimes. Police searched it, found nothing. Daniel expressed disappointment. Not frustration, not anger, just disappointment. Weeks turned into months. Rachel's case went cold. Life began to move on, but Daniel didn't. He kept Rachel alive in conversations, posted about her on social media, shared memories. He made sure no one forget her, which felt touching until it didn't. Years later, a construction crew working near the same area Daniel had suggested made a discovery. Human remains, buried shallow, hidden but not carefully. DNA confirmed what everyone feared, and it was Rachel. The case reopened immediately, and detectives did what they always do in cold cases. They went back to the beginning, back to the people who had been there from the start, back to Daniel. This time the interviews were different. The questions were tighter, more specific, and for the first time, Daniel hesitated, just slightly, but enough. Investigators re examined his earlier statements, compared them to newer timelines. They noticed something that hasn't stood out before. Daniel had known details that were never made public. Small things, but real ones. They searched Daniel's property, not because they had proof, but because they had story no longer that felt right. What they found didn't scream guilt, no trophies, no evidence at all, just something subtle. Something that matters only once when he knew Rachel had been found. So detectives confronted him again. This time they didn't accuse, they let silence do the work. They talked about Rachel, about how long she had been alone, about her family, and still waited for answers. And that's when Daniel broke. He didn't confess dramatically. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just talked like someone who finally relieved to stop pretending. Daniel admitted he had killed Rachel, not in moment of passion, not during a fight. It was calculated, planned, and after it was done, he did something even more disturbing. He stayed. He stayed close to the investigation, inserted himself into every phrase, controlled the narrative, watched how police works, listened to what they knew, adjusted his behavior accordingly, and for years it worked. In court, prosecutors laid it out plainly. Daniel hadn't just murdered someone, he had studied grief. He learned how people behave when they are desperate. He used empathy as a camouflage, and because he never felt the spotlight, no one thought to question why he was always there. Daniel was convicted, sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read, because people were shocked, but because they finally understood how close he had been the entire time. Rachel's family later spoke publicly. They said the hardest part wasn't just losing her, it was realizing they had accepted comfort from a person who took her away. That betrayal cut deeper than the crime itself. This story leaves you with a strange feeling, not fear, awareness, because monsters don't always hide. Sometimes they help you search. These stories don't feel distant, they feel adjacent, and that's what makes coincidence unsettling. Not because it's rare, but because it's ordinary. These aren't once in a lifetime decisions, they are everyday moments. Moments we don't remember until one of them becomes the last thing someone ever did.